everybody, and welcome to our training video, Balance and Bias, Developing Pupils' Critical Literacy Skills. We are Sorcha and Paul from the NewsWise team here at the Guardian Foundation. NewsWise is a cross-curricular news literacy programme for 7 to 11-year-olds. We are run in partnership by the Guardian Foundation, the National Literacy Trust and the PSHE Association. We offer a fully planned suite of lessons with more than 100 resources, pupil workshops, a chance to hear from real journalists, and CPD for teachers. The whole project has been created by literacy, news, and PSHE education specialists.
So in this video, we'll talk about how we can distinguish between fact and opinion, look at points of view and bias in a story, and think about how information is targeted. We'll also share some activities and resources that will make these tricky concepts more accessible for your pupils. All of these resources are free to access on our website. To find out more about evaluating trustworthiness and reliability of information, watch our Fake News Detectives training video. First, take a moment to reflect on what you're doing in your own classroom. You may want to pause the video here and think about how you would answer these two questions. What reading skills do you already address when looking at news in the classroom? And what does critical literacy mean to you when it comes to looking at news? In the past, teachers have said that they teach a wide range of reading skills, from more basic retrieval to more complex skills of inference and language analysis. As for critical literacy skills, we're going to look more at how we can use the concepts of bias and balance to develop these later in this video. But what do we mean when we talk about critical literacy? Critical literacy is not a subject on its own. Instead, it's an approach that can be embedded across the curriculum and applied to all text types. At its heart, it aims to foster active readers who question and challenge information rather than simply accepting it at face value. One way in which we can understand critical literacy is assessing the truthfulness of the information presented to us through identifying fake news. But critical literacy goes beyond that. It's about asking questions and answering critical questions to explore how a text has been constructed. This could be looking at how the writer has chosen to tell the story, how people are represented within it, whose points of view have been included, whose have not been included, and identifying the writer's intention and asking whether they're trying to influence the reader in some way. Exploring a text in this way can be really empowering. It brings awareness to how texts might be impacting you, your thinking, and your view of the world. If we think about this in the context of news, we should remember that one news story can be told in many different ways. We don't always get the full picture or all of the facts, nor do we always hear different points of view. News organisations in the UK are regulated, meaning that they have to follow strict rules around false reporting, including publishing corrections for anything they accidentally publish incorrectly. So they can't publish anything that's untrue, but news organisations also have their own values and political leanings, which guide their viewpoints and angles on a story. If we compare the way stories are represented across different publications, even just looking at headlines, we can really notice the different ways that one story can be presented, just like the examples you can see here. This can be difficult for adults to get our heads around. So how do we bring critical literacy skills into the primary classroom? How can we make this way of thinking accessible for young children so that they can begin to develop these skills? Firstly, we developed the NewsWise values to help children understand what quality, responsible reporting should be. Pupils can refer to these when they're reading and analysing news reports, as well as when they're writing their own. We want pupils to understand that news should be truthful. That means we should be able to trust the news report is giving us all the facts accurately. Being able to distinguish between opinion and fact is a helpful part of this too. We also think it should be fair. This helps us to think about representation in news stories. Are the people within it being represented or treated fairly? Balanced. Can we hear all the sides of the story? And is a news story interesting? Why has the writer chosen to report the story? What's the public interest? Who might be interested in reading it? Real newsrooms have their own similar values and standards which they measure their reporting against. Making the NewsWise experience authentic as possible is important for pupils' engagement, so the values help them make their learning real too. You can download a NewsWise values poster for your classroom from our website. Having the right questions is essential to teaching your pupils the critical literacy skills that they need. The array of questions you can see here can be explored in the classroom to help. The questions are broken down into 4 themes: representation, points of view, writer's intentional motivation, consequences, and taking action. When thinking about representation, you might encourage pupils to think about who they want to defend or criticise in a news story. Pupils can then explore the ways in which the writer may have influenced them to feel that way. You could then look at whether this is a fair representation, returning to those NewsWise values we looked at earlier. Looking at points of view can be a great way to develop pupils' inference skills in the context of non-fiction, as they work to infer whose points of view can be heard, as well as those that aren't included in the text. To extend that thinking further, you can analyse why the writer has chosen to include or silence certain groups of people. When it comes to writer's intention, pupils can look at how the writer has tried to influence the reader through their language choice. Considering language use and its impact on the reader is usually done when analysing fictional poetry, but we can also do this with news reports. As for consequences and taking action, we'll come on to that later. It's important to highlight that developing pupils' critical literacy skills naturally develops many of the core reading skills outlined in the English curricula across the UK. As we mentioned a moment ago, identifying whose points of view are missing from a news report will build on inference. Evaluating the writer's language choices and their impact on the reader helps pupils to analyse how a text is constructed. Distinguishing between fact and opinion too is another link between critical literacy and core reading skills. We're going to introduce a few activities now that will help to develop these critical literacy skills in the classroom. These activities cover the full 7 to 11 age range. However, you can adapt any of them and make them appropriate for the year group that you teach.
When we think about distinguishing between fact and opinion, your pupils could be coming from different starting points. Some of your pupils will completely understand the concept of fact and opinion, while others may be unable to define what a fact is. This is a very brief activity used during our classroom workshop for 7 to 9-year-olds. We tell them that a fact has to be two things. Firstly, it has to be true, and it can also be proven to be true. We then present these statements to them and invite them to discuss which of these are facts and which are not. Your pupils may be ready to use other terms like opinion as well, but we start by keeping it as basic as possible. Notice that the actual lunch menu is included too, so that your pupils can refer to this to prove why a particular statement is a fact. This will have your pupils actively proving what is or is not a fact, while also encouraging them to use their skills or retrieval. Your pupils may be completely confident with the concept of fact and opinion, and they may even be ready to expand their understanding into other terms like rumour and speculation. In our training video on spotting fake news, we outline how misinformation can be deliberately created and shared. But a lot of what we see, especially on social media and including WhatsApp, is rumour, speculation, and opinion. When a news story is breaking and has captured the public's attention, it can be really difficult to tell what is trustworthy information. In this context, knowing the difference between what is a fact and what is not is really important. This activity gives examples of people's responses to a breaking news event. We have created these ourselves based on what was really said at the time of the story. We have also provided banks of language clues to help children identify the differences between them. The news context is especially helpful in this activity as it really reinforces the importance of facts by getting your pupils to think about the consequences of spreading rumours about an ongoing news story. It also makes the activity real and gives it purpose.
In our unit of work for 7 to 9-year-olds, we include a lesson on balanced reporting. For pupils to be able to access this, a good starting point is to encourage them to think about what different points of view around a story might be. For this example, we show the pupils this outline of a story about e-scooters being banned in the streets of Paris. We then show some character profiles to get them thinking about how different people may feel about it. So looking at these two character profiles for Susan and Linda, what might they be thinking about the potential for an e-scooter ban in Paris? It's easy to imagine that Susan is likely to support the ban as somebody who finds the e-scooters frightening. Meanwhile, Linda is less likely to support it as someone who thinks the scooters are good for the environment and provides an alternative way to commute to work. Once your pupils have considered Once your pupils have considered the different potential views on the ban, you can then introduce an example of an unbalanced news report. You can have your pupils discuss whose point of view is included in the article, whose point of view is not included in the article, and how can you tell? Pupils can annotate the example report and look for cues that help them to recognise that the report is not balanced. For example, only one person's views are quoted in the report, and some things are described in a way that is emotive rather than fact-based. They can also refer back to those character profiles from earlier to think about how each of them might feel when they read this unbalanced report. This activity here comes from our lesson on bias. When teaching your pupils about bias, this will be a great opportunity to analyse language and have your pupils think about the words that are used by the writer to influence the reader's thinking. As I read it, think about the questions. Who do you want to defend or criticise in the story? And what language has the writer used to influence you? So it says, Lauren Page Smith, 19, was treating herself to a McDonald's for lunch when she kindly offered one of her chips to a hungry bird. She was immediately approached by a rude council worker who thoughtlessly issued her with a £25 fine for littering. Animal lover Laura told the official that she hadn't been littering. She explained that the pigeon had eaten the whole chip, so there was no litter left on the ground. However, the harsh council worker still gave her the fine. So what did you think about those two questions? There are other ways you can explore news reports when considering bias and balance. For example, pupils could rewrite an unbalanced report to make it more balanced. Any of the examples from the NewsWise resources could be used, or you could find your own or write your own example. Drama opportunities can also work well. For example, holding press conferences or hot seating with children in role as different people affected by the events. That will help pupils to explore those different points of view. And when you're analysing language or representation, word banks can be really helpful. You might create a mind map of all the words used to describe a subject in the story. With the pigeon story, we could list the words used to describe Lauren and then contrast it with the descriptions of the council. And as we saw at the start of this video, headlines are another great way to bring in language analysis and comparison. It can be really surprising to see the different spin that news organisations have on a story. Children may be surprised at just how differently some of the same stories can be portrayed in different publications.
We're going to move on to talk about targeted information. When navigating media that can be biased or imbalanced, getting a one-sided view of the world can also be down to targeted information. Here are some examples of how content is suggested to us online. Even search engine results are personalised. You can probably think of many places online where you'll be shown targeted or personalised content. And this can be a good thing. It saves us time and means you can access plenty of content that you want to watch, read, or listen to. While targeted content benefits the user, we should also ask who else is benefiting from it. Why does an organisation want to keep me on their site for as long as possible? We should also wonder, is it only a problem if we only see information from the same sources or on the same topics over and over? Why don't we always want to be served information about things we are already interested in? While targeted information might keep us watching or reading for longer than we should, it can also mean that we don't hear different sides of the story or get all the facts. Understanding that online information is targeted is in the statutory requirements for health education in England. We have developed a lesson with the PSHE Association, which is suitable for upper primary, that introduces this complex concept in a fun and accessible way by using games to help children understand what is happening and prompting them to think about the consequences. This lesson begins with pupils looking at character profiles and considering what types of news stories and headlines would be targeted for them. After considering how different people will have different content and information targeted to them, they can then play Hook the Reader game. Playing in pairs, one person picks an area of interest or hobby from the table at the top of your screen. The other person plays the role of the algorithm and has to select words from their list to try and keep them interested. This helps pupils to understand how machine learning works, but in a really low-tech, accessible way. As with any subject, pupils can consolidate this knowledge by applying it in a real-life context. Our NewsWise units of work will provide fully resourced lessons that will help your pupils to write either a high-quality written news report for ages 9 to 11 or an audio broadcast script for ages 7 to 9. The latter, of course, can be recorded or performed, and our unit of work also contains lessons on interviewing skills and how a producer and presenter work together to produce a broadcast news report. Making their learning real in this way helps them to practice the skills of producing balanced, unbiased news reports, as well as understanding the consequences of imbalance and bias in the news. We cover this in more detail in our other training videos. Throughout this video, we've mentioned a lot of our resources. All of these are available absolutely free from our website. You can see the address on the screen now, and the link is in the video description. On our website, you will also find the other training videos in this series. Thank you so much for watching.